It all started on a Tuesday, one of those bright, blisteringly sunny Austin afternoons where the Texas heat makes the air shimmer above the asphalt, and the cicadas buzz in a constant, drowsy rhythm. My daughter, Jessica, had gotten married just 2 days before, and the glow of it all was still on her, a soft, luminous aura of pure happiness. She sat at my kitchen table, the same worn oak table she'd done her homework on as a little girl, her cheeks still flushed with the joy of a new bride. I clutched my heavy ceramic coffee mug, the porcelain warm against my palms, and just watched her. She was my whole world, the beautiful, vibrant center of it. I'd raised her alone after my husband, her father, Mark, passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, and seeing her this happy, it was everything I'd ever wanted for her. It was the culmination of every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every late-night talk, every sacrifice I'd made. But my daughter wasn't alone. My new son-in-law, Brandon, sat beside her. He leaned back in his chair with a casual sort of ownership, an arm draped lazily along the back of Jess's seat. He had a smile that was too wide, too polished, like the capped teeth of a game show host. It was the kind of smile I'd seen on salesmen trying to sell me a faulty car and politicians making promises they never intended to keep. It was the smile of a man who wanted something from you and was confident he was going to get it. Thank God I had kept my secret. The secret my dear Mark had left me with. A burden and a blessing all at once. $7 million. Tucked away in a series of trusts and investments. A silent guardian for my and Jessica's future. Mark had been a quiet, unassuming geology professor, but he'd been a brilliant, almost prescient investor. Carol, he'd told me a few months before he died, his hand covering mine, money is a tool. In the right hands, it can build a legacy. In the wrong hands, it's a wrecking ball. Protect this. Protect our girl. I had told no one, not even Jess. I knew what that kind of money could do, the greed it could attract, the way it could warp relationships and turn good people into monsters. I wanted to protect her from that. I just never imagined the threat would be sitting right here at my kitchen table, calling me Mom with that unnervingly perfect smile. And that's when it happened. The moment the peace of the last 2 days shattered. With a flick of his wrist, as smooth and practiced as a card-sharp dealing a crooked hand, Brandon slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished wood. It stopped just inches from my coffee mug. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just stared at it, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. "This is just something to make things easier in the long run, Carol," he said, his voice as smooth as expensive honey. But I heard the steel underneath it, the cold, hard edge of a command disguised as a suggestion. You know, legal stuff, asset alignment, future planning. Jessica nodded eagerly, her eyes shining with misplaced adoration. "It's just a formality, Mom. Brandon's brilliant with finances. He's setting up a family trust for when we have kids. You understand, right?" My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. The envelope was thick, heavy. I could see the yellow legal paper pressed together inside, notarized, clipped. It was the kind of paperwork that carried the weight of lives. And the worst part, my name, Carol Price, was written on it in his neat, perfect, soulless block letters. I kept my voice steady, a feat of willpower that took every ounce of my strength. "And what exactly does this require of me?" He smiled, and the cold dread in my gut turned to ice. He had no idea what he was asking for, no idea what he was up against, but he was about to find out. Before we dive into the details of that horrible day, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It helps me feel connected to you all. Let me know in the comments what city or country you're in and what time it is for you. Now, let's get back to it. Brandon's smile didn't falter for a second. He picked up his plate, stacking it neatly on top of Jessica's as if he was the most helpful, considerate man in the world. It was a small, calculated gesture, designed to showcase his domesticity, his partnership. "Nothing much," he said, his tone breezy. "Just your signature, an acknowledgement. Your assets, your future holdings, rolling it all together will just save us all time and complications later. It's about creating a united front for our family's future. Just take a look when you can." He spoke as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Handing your wife's mother a legal document days after saying your vows, a document designed to swallow her entire life's work and financial security. It was a breathtaking display of audacity. Jessica looked at him with such pride, completely unaware of the storm gathering behind my eyes. She saw a proactive, responsible husband. I saw a corporate raider staging a hostile takeover of my family. They stood to leave, and Brandon, ever the performer, brushed a few imaginary crumbs from my table with his hand, moving through my kitchen like it was already his. "We're off on the honeymoon to Hawaii tomorrow," he added casually, dropping the location like an anchor to impress me. I didn't answer. I didn't even nod. I just watched them go, my chest tight with a silence that felt more dangerous than a scream. When the front door clicked shut, the sound echoed in the sudden quiet of the house. I reached for the envelope with hands that, to my disgust, were trembling slightly. I tore it open, my fingers clumsy. The words blurred as I read, a dense jungle of legalese. But the intent was crystal clear. It was a financial agreement, a document that would grant him, as the trustee of the new Harris Family Trust, significant, almost irrevocable control over any and all assets I agreed to place within it. It was a cage, gilded with words like efficiency and legacy, but a cage nonetheless. He had no idea what he was reaching for, the sheer scale of the fortune he was sniffing around, but he was about to find out exactly who he was dealing with. The next morning came too early. The knock on my door was sharp, precise, 9 a.m. on the dot. I barely finished my first sip of coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to calm the anxiety that had kept me tossing and turning all night. I opened the door expecting to see a package delivery or perhaps a neighbor. It wasn't. A young man stood there in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. It was too crisp, too expensive for his age, which I guessed was late 20s. He carried a black leather briefcase, his hair slicked back with a precision that matched his suit. His smile was polite, but his eyes were empty, like a shark's. "Mrs. Price?" he asked, extending a hand. I just nodded, ignoring the offered hand. Something in my gut, a primal motherly instinct, screamed at me to slam the door in his face.
"My name is Carter Doyle," he said, retracting his hand smoothly, unfazed. "I'm representing Brandon and Jessica Harris regarding an urgent financial arrangement." The sound of my daughter's name, with his last name attached, spoken so casually by this stranger, hit me like a physical blow. Jessica Harris. She hadn't told me she'd legally changed it already. Or maybe, like everything else, Brandon had just decided for her. I tightened my grip on the doorframe. "My daughter's name is Jessica Price," I said, my voice flat and cold. For a split second, his professional mask faltered, a flicker of surprise in those empty eyes. But it snapped right back into place. He was good, but I was better. He had no idea the war he had just walked into. The lawyer, Carter Doyle, recovered in a heartbeat. "Of course, my mistake," he said, his smile returning. "A perfect plastic thing. May I come in? This won't take long." Every instinct I had, every red flag that was waving frantically in my mind, told me to say no. But a darker, sharper curiosity took over. I needed to know the full scope of their plan. I needed to see all their cards before I played my own. I stepped aside. He walked into my home not like a guest, but like an appraiser. his eyes flicking around, taking in the art on the walls, the quality of the furniture. He was surveying a property he was about to acquire. He set his briefcase on my dining room table, the same table where I'd once braided Jessica's hair before her school dances, and spread glossy legal folders across its surface, like a dealer laying down cards in a high-stakes poker game. "This contract," Carter began, clicking open a pen with a sharp, officious sound, "is what we call a precautionary measure, a standard procedure when families of means merge. Brandon and Jessica have decided to combine their financial futures. Naturally, this includes any immediate family holdings that could benefit the trust and ensure its long-term stability." I didn't sit. I crossed my arms, standing over him, watching him like a hawk circling its prey. He didn't seem bothered, or perhaps he was just well-trained in ignoring a hostile atmosphere. "Jessica signed this document yesterday morning before leaving for their honeymoon," he continued, his tone smooth and reasonable. "Brandon requested that you add your signature before week's end. That way, everything is processed cleanly and efficiently before their return." My eyes narrowed. "Before they get back?" He nodded, not meeting my gaze, instead focusing on tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the signature line. "Yes, it's really just a formal acknowledgement of the family's financial alignment, nothing complicated. It simplifies tax burdens and probate issues down the line." "Cut the fluff," I said, my voice cold enough to cut glass. "I've read the document. Show me the section about the money, the part about the trustees' discretionary powers." His hand hesitated for the briefest of moments. He had underestimated me. He expected a grieving, naive widow, not someone who reads the fine print. He turned the contract around and pointed to a line of dense text. Section 7.2, Parental Estate Disclosures and Pre-Inheritance Trust Structures. In plain English, they wanted me to list every significant asset I owned. They wanted a full accounting. They were sniffing for my $7 million. And right there, above the empty line for my signature, was Jessica's. It was slanted and rushed, the careless scrawl of a happy, trusting girl who had no idea she was signing away her mother's future. I pressed my palm flat against the cool wood of the table, grounding myself. "My daughter's name is Jessica Price," I said, my voice flat and cold. The lawyer's polite mask slipped again, just for a second, and I saw a flash of annoyance. He had expected a quick, easy victory. He gathered his papers, the crisp rustle sounded loud in the tense silence. He nodded curtly and left. As the door shut, I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The opening salvo had been fired. The game had officially begun. I immediately picked up the phone and dialed the one person I trusted to help me fight a war in the shadows. My lawyer, David Chen. I'd known David for 20 years. He'd helped Mark and I draw up our wills. He was sharp, loyal, and unflappable. I told him everything. "They're circling like vultures, David." He was quiet for a moment, letting me finish. Then he asked, his voice calm and steady, "Do you want me to review the document, Carol?" "No," I said firmly, a new cold resolve hardening inside me like steel. "I want you to draft a decoy." David went silent on the other end of the line. A decoy. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp legal mind. We were no longer on the defense. It was time to set a trap, and I was about to learn just how low my new son-in-law was willing to go.
"That was my first lesson," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "People, even family, will always try to take what isn't theirs if they smell weakness. I won't let Brandon do that to Jessica. I won't let him turn her against me and bleed her dry. I have to protect her, even if it means she hates me for a little while." "I understand," David said, his voice firm now, all caution replaced by commitment. "I'll get my forensic accounting team on it. We'll build you a financial history so convincing the IRS would believe it. Give me a week." While David started weaving the intricate web of our deception, an uneasy feeling settled deep in my bones. It was a mother's intuition, a primal sense that something was wrong beyond the paperwork and the legal threats. The feeling was confirmed 2 days later when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway, my heart thudding. Carol? It's Sarah. Sarah. Jessica's best friend since they were 5 years old. They were inseparable, more like sisters than friends. Hearing her voice, tight with worry, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Sarah, honey, what's wrong? Her next words would confirm my deepest fears. The battle wasn't just for my money, it was for my daughter's soul, and I was already losing ground. I'm sorry to bother you, Sarah started, her voice trembling slightly over the phone. But have you heard from Jess? I've been calling and texting her for 2 days, and nothing. I know they're on their honeymoon in Hawaii, but she promised she'd send pictures of the volcanoes. She'd never just go silent like this, not even for a day. My blood ran cold. I tried to keep my own voice calm, not wanting to alarm her further. She hasn't called me either, but I assumed they were just busy, enjoying themselves. It's their honeymoon. That's what I thought too, Sarah said, and then her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But I got really worried, so I did something stupid. I called the main line at the hotel resort Brandon had mentioned they were staying at. I just asked to be put through to their room. And? I asked, gripping the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. A man answered. It was Brandon. And he was so weird, Carol, so cold. He said Jess was unwinding and didn't want to be bothered. He said she was taking a break from her old life to focus on their new one. When I asked if I could just say hi for a second, he told me she was sleeping, even though it was the middle of the afternoon in Hawaii. His tone, it was like he was annoyed that I even existed. He made it sound like I was some clingy ex-girlfriend instead of her best friend. Taking a break from her old life. The phrase hit me like a slap. Sarah wasn't her old life. She was family. She was the maid of honor at her wedding, the person who had held her hand through every breakup and celebrated every success. Brandon wasn't just trying to get his hands on my money. He was systematically, deliberately cutting my daughter off from everyone who loved her, everyone who knew her before him. He was building walls around her, brick by brick, and she was so blinded by love and the illusion of a perfect new life that she couldn't even see them going up. I tried to reassure Sarah, telling her I'd try to get in touch with Jess, that it was probably just a misunderstanding. But my heart wasn't in it. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I knew I wouldn't be able to get past the gatekeeper. Brandon was isolating her, making himself the only voice she heard, the only person she could rely on. It was a classic, terrifying tactic of control. This wasn't just a financial scam anymore. This was about ownership. He wanted to own her future, her finances, and now her relationships. He was creating a world where he was her son, and everyone else was just a distant, fading star. After I hung up with Sarah, I sat in the oppressive silence of my kitchen, the morning sun feeling cold and distant. The legal documents on my counter suddenly seemed a minor skirmish in a much larger, more sinister war. The money was just a tool for him, the leverage he needed to achieve his real goal. The real prize he was after was my daughter's soul. A new fierce kind of anger burned through me, hotter and purer than any fear. He thought he was smart, isolating her, turning her world into an island where he was the only other inhabitant. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd forgotten about me. I wasn't just some old woman to be pushed aside, a financial problem to be solved. I was her mother. I was the one who had built her up, who had taught her to be strong and independent. And I'd be damned if I let some slick, smiling sociopath tear all that down. He thought he was building a cage. He had no idea I was about to start forging the key, and I would burn his entire world to the ground to get my daughter out. A week after that disturbing call with Sarah, a sleek, professional-looking courier delivered a package from David's office. Inside, the documents were a work of art, a masterpiece of financial fiction. There was a fabricated inheritance disclosure,
complete with official-looking letterhead from a fictitious law firm. There were falsified tax filings from the previous year showing significant capital losses from Mark's bad investments. There was even a forged letter from a bank confirming the closure of a large investment account to settle outstanding medical debts. The final number, the bottom line of my supposed inheritance, was a modest, believable $280,000. Just enough to be a nice little nest egg, but a bitter disappointment for a predator like Brandon, who was hunting for millions. David had even created a subtle digital trail, a series of small, traceable transactions that would lead any amateur sleuth to believe they had cleverly uncovered the truth of my financial situation. We were setting a breadcrumb trail for a wolf, leading him not to a feast, but to an empty plate. With a steady hand, I took the main disclosure document and placed the folder on my desk in the small home office. I didn't hide it. I left it open, casual, as if I'd just been looking at it and had been called away, forgetting to put it away. It was a piece of bait, left in plain sight. Then I sat in the quiet of my house and waited. 2 days passed. Nothing. A small, foolish part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in the goodness of people, started to hope that maybe I was wrong. Maybe his intentions were just clumsy, not malicious. Maybe he would see the small inheritance and back off, content with what he had. But deep down, in the part of my soul that had seen the coldness in his eyes, I knew better. Predators don't just give up. They just find another way in. On the third night, the message came. It wasn't a phone call, but a text alert from my bank's fraud department at 11:30 p.m., an hour when honest people are asleep. It read, "Security alert. An unsuccessful login attempt was made on an archived account. Please verify this activity."
My heart started to hammer against my ribs. I clicked the link, my fingers fumbling with the screen. The attempt was on an old joint savings account I'd shared with my late husband, an account I had completely forgotten about. The balance was less than $5,000. It wasn't an account worth touching unless you were probing, testing the defenses, looking for a way into the main network. And then I saw the detail that made my blood turn to ice. The security question they'd tried to answer was, "What was your mother's maiden name?" It was my maiden name, Price. Only 2 people on this earth besides me had ever known that detail, a piece of information from a long-forgotten security setup from 20 years ago. My late husband and my daughter, Jessica. I had pulled her years ago when she first went off to college, in case of an emergency, which meant only one thing. Brandon was digging, and Jessica, in her innocent, trusting love for him, had given him the shovel. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in my study, the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room, staring at the fake inheritance folder. He had taken the bait. He hadn't found the document on my desk yet, but he was already searching for the vault. Now it was just a matter of time before he made his next move. But I didn't want to wait. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to look him in the eye when he thought he was about to get a treasure chest, and I handed him a box of sand instead. The next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed Jessica's number. My voice a perfect symphony of light, casual, motherly love. "Sweetheart, now that you two are back and settled from that beautiful trip, why don't you let me take you and Brandon out for a nice lunch? My treat." She sounded delighted, completely oblivious. "Oh, Mom, he'll be so happy to hear that. I knew you'd come around." Yes, I thought grimly, clutching the phone until my knuckles were white. The trap was set. Now it was time to watch the wolf walk right into it, and I prayed my daughter wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. We met at a quiet garden cafe that Jessica had always loved, a serene little oasis in the middle of bustling Austin. It was a place filled with happy memories of birthday lunches and mother-daughter chats. Today, it felt like a stage, set for the most important performance of my life. Brandon arrived looking like he'd just stepped out of a magazine for aspiring CEOs. He wore a crisp powder blue suit and a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes.
He looked around the charming courtyard, filled with koi ponds and blooming rose bushes, with an air of detached approval, as if he were calculating the price of the real estate. "You picked a good spot, Carol," he said smoothly, adjusting the cuff of his shirt. "Very tasteful." Jessica beamed, squeezing his arm. "Mom always knows the best places." I gave a tight smile, my nerves steadying into a cold resolve. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. Every word, every gesture, a calculated move. As the waiter took our order, I reached into my handbag, my heart beginning to beat a little bit faster. Speaking of getting things in order, too, I did have a chance to review those papers you gave me, Brandon. His eyes, which had been scanning the menu, snapped to mine. A greedy, triumphant light flickered within them. He leaned forward, an eager predator scenting a kill. The performance was about to begin. I pulled out David's decoy disclosure, the masterpiece of financial fiction, and laid it gently on the table between the breadbasket and the water glasses. Here's the summary of my inheritance from Mark. As you can see, after all his outstanding medical debts and the final legal fees were settled, there's about $280,000 remaining. Not much, I know, but with careful planning, it should be enough for a modest retirement. The air at the table shifted. It was almost imperceptible, but I felt it. For half a second, Brandon's mask of charm vanished completely. I saw it. The flash of raw, unfiltered rage in his eyes, the furious calculations spinning in his head as he processed the number. This wasn't the number he wanted. This wasn't the jackpot he'd been promised. Then, just as quickly as it had vanished, the smile was back. But it was strained now, brittle at the edges, like a cheap veneer. Jessica blinked, her brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "Wait, what, Mom? I thought Dad left more than that. He always said he had us taken care of." I met her gaze, my own eyes filled with a carefully practiced sadness, a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Your father carried more debt than I ever told you, sweetheart. He was a proud man. We had to sell the lake house a few years ago to cover most of it. I didn't want to burden you while you were finishing school." It was a cruel lie to tell, invoking the memory of our beloved lake house, but it was a necessary cruelty. Her shoulders slumped, a flicker of real disappointment crossing her face. She wasn't greedy, my Jessica, but she had believed in the security her father had promised. Brandon cleared his throat, taking a long sip of water to buy himself a moment. "Well," he said, his voice a little loud, a little too forced, "it's at least something, a very solid foundation. With proper management, even small amounts can grow significantly. We'll take care of you, Carol. Don't you worry." I gave a polite, grateful nod, hiding the triumphant fire that was burning inside me. He believed it. The greedy, arrogant fool actually believed it. The rest of the lunch was a surreal performance of small talk. Jessica, trying to rally, chattered about their honeymoon. Brandon told an exaggerated story about a concierge offering them a private yacht. I nodded, smiled, and waited for the performance to end. When the plates were cleared, he placed his hand over Jessica's. "We're a family now," he said, warmly, looking from her to me. "We'll figure it all out together." I smiled back, a tight-lipped, knowing smile. But later that night, the phone rang again. It was the bank. Another suspicious login attempt. This time, it wasn't just an old, forgotten account. Someone had tried to log into my main digital banking profile using Jessica's tablet. He wasn't waiting. He wasn't discouraged. He was just angry. And he was already trying to take what little he thought was mine, using my own daughter as his unwitting accomplice. The lunch at the cafe was one thing, a calculated performance. But what happened 3 days later was a brutal personal attack that cut me deeper than any legal document ever could. Jessica showed up at my house alone. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard her car door slam in the driveway. It was a sound of anger and frustration. She stormed inside, her face tight, her eyes flashing. She didn't even sit down. "Why did you threaten Brandon?" she demanded, her voice trembling with accusation. "Excuse me? I did no such thing."
"He told me everything," she cried, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. He said you cornered him at lunch, that you accused him of trying to steal from you. He said you called him a liar and a thief right there in the restaurant. How could you, Mom? My chest ached. He was quicker, more venomous than I'd expected. He hadn't just gone after my accounts. He'd launched a preemptive streak against my credibility. He was twisting the narrative, painting himself as the victim of a paranoid, hostile mother-in-law. Jessica, I said, my voice calm and careful, that is not what happened. I never threatened him. I simply gave him the financial summary he asked for and told him I wouldn't sign anything without a legal review. That's all. She shook her head, her voice rising with a desperate, frustrated energy. You're spying on us. You're treating him like a criminal. Why can't you just be happy for me? He loves me. He's trying to build a future for us, for our family, and you're trying to tear it all down. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I forced myself to stay calm, to be the rational adult. Sweetheart, I have seen men like him before. They charm, they flatter, and then, when no one is looking, they take everything. I am not going to stand by and watch that happen to you. But my words were a wall she couldn't, or wouldn't climb. And then he twisted the knife. A few days after that explosive argument, Jessica came over again. This time, her demeanor was completely different. The anger was gone, replaced by a soft, heartbreaking concern. She brought me a bouquet of daisies, my favorite. She sat me down on the sofa, her expression full of gentle worry. Mom, she began, her voice soft. Brandon and I were going through some of Dad's old things you gave us, some of his files from the university. He found a box of old medical bills from when Dad was sick. She paused, taking my hand. Her skin was warm and soft, just like when she was a little girl. He sat down with me, Mom. He showed me. The insurance paperwork was right there with them. The university's insurance covered almost everything. There wasn't any massive debt, like you said. I stared at her, my blood running cold. He was meticulous. He had found a few old bills and woven a new, more poisonous narrative around them. She squeezed my hand, her eyes welling up with tears. He's worried about you, Mom. He's not angry, he's just concerned. He said that sometimes when people go through a profound grief like you did with Dad, it can affect their memory. It can make things confusing. Are you sure you're remembering things correctly about the finances, Mom? Are you okay? Maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Evans, maybe. I felt the air leave my lungs. He hadn't just called me a liar. He was gaslighting me, using my own daughter as his instrument. He was making her believe I was losing my mind. She wasn't looking at me with suspicion or anger anymore. She was looking at me with pity, as if I were a confused, fragile old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own memories. And that was 1,000 times more painful than any argument. He wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was trying to steal my daughter's trust and my own sanity. He was turning my own daughter against me, using my grief as a weapon. I felt so alone. Let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? How do you fight back when the person you're trying to save is being convinced you're the enemy? Let me know in the comments. I felt like I was losing her, and I knew I had to do something drastic. The pity in Jessica's eyes haunted me for days. It was a constant, suffocating presence, worse than any argument. Anger I could fight, but pity? That was a quiet, creeping poison that seeped into everything. Every time she called to check on me, her voice was laced with a gentle, patronizing concern. Every offer to help me with my bills or organize my paperwork felt like a small, sharp jab, a reminder that in her eyes, I was becoming incompetent. Brandon had played his hand brilliantly. He was no longer the greedy son-in-law. He was the concerned, supportive husband, worried about his poor, confused mother-in-law. He had taken my trap and turned it back on me.
isolating me in a prison of supposed incompetence. I felt a despair so profound it was like drowning in slow motion. How could I prove he was a liar when he had my own daughter, my sweet, intelligent Jessica, convinced I was losing my mind? My own reality was starting to feel thin, unstable. Had I remembered the debts correctly? Of course I had. But his constant, insidious suggestions, filtered through my daughter's loving concern, were a form of psychological torture. The final straw came a week later. I was trying to pay some bills online, but my computer was running impossibly slow. Pop-up ads were appearing everywhere. I was frustrated, but figured it was just a virus. I mentioned it to Jessica on the phone. An hour later, Brandon was at my door. "Jess told me you were having some computer trouble," he said with his trademark charming smile. "My first company was in IT. Let me take a look. I can probably fix it in no time." I was hesitant, a knot of dread in my stomach. But what could I say? If I refused, it would just be more proof of my paranoia. I reluctantly let him in and led him to my office. He sat down at my desk, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He clicked and typed, murmuring technical jargon about malware and corrupted registries. After about 30 minutes, he stood up, beaming. "All fixed. You are riddled with spyware. I cleaned it all out and installed a new security suite. You should be good to go, Carol." He was the picture of the helpful, tech-savvy son-in-law. I thanked him, my voice tight, and he left. It wasn't until the next morning that I discovered what he really did. I sat down to access a file, a folder containing all of my important financial documents, passwords, and scans of personal IDs. It was gone. Not just the file, the entire folder had vanished from my desktop. I searched everywhere. The recycle bin, my documents, my cloud backup. Nothing. As if it had never existed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I called Jessica, my voice trembling. "The folder is gone, the one with all my important documents. Brandon was on my computer yesterday, and now it's gone." There was a pause in the line, and then Jessica's voice, full of that same heartbreaking concern. "Oh, Mom, are you sure? Brandon said he just ran a cleanup program. Sometimes those things accidentally delete files if they're in the wrong place. Are you sure you remember where you saved it? Maybe you moved it." "I didn't move it, Jessica," I cried, my frustration boiling over. "It was on the desktop. He did this." "Mom, please calm down," she said soothingly, her tone the one you use with a hysterical child. "You're getting worked up over nothing. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Brandon would never do something like that. He was just trying to help."
I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I sank into my chair, staring at the empty space on my computer screen where my life's most important information used to be. He hadn't just deleted a file. He had stolen my security, my peace of mind, and then used the act to provide more proof to my daughter that I was a confused, forgetful old woman. He was a ghost in the machine, my life, and he was slowly, methodically deleting me. That was the moment the despair turned into pure, cold fury. He had come into my home, sat at my desk, and deliberately sabotaged me. I was done playing defense. It was time to find a ghost from his past to exorcise the one in my present. The incident with the computer was a declaration of war. He had invaded my home, my digital life, and had done it with a smile on his face. The despair that had been clouding my mind evaporated, replaced by a sharp, clear, all-consuming rage. I was done being the victim. I was done being gaslit. It was time to fight back, not with traps and decoys, but with the cold, hard truth. I called David Chen, my voice no longer hollow, but low and dangerous. I told him what Brandon had done, how he'd deleted my files and used it to further convince Jessica of my supposed decline. "This has gone far beyond a financial dispute, Carol," David said, his voice grim. "This is psychological abuse. He's a predator.
We need to find something to discredit him completely, something that even Jessica, in her current state, cannot deny. I know, I said, pacing my living room like a caged tiger. A fake document isn't enough. My word against his isn't enough. We need something concrete, something undeniable, something from his own mouth, or from someone he's burned before. Arrogant men like Brandon always make mistakes. They get sloppy because they believe they're smarter than everyone else. They leave a trail. We just need to find it. After we hung up, I sat at my new, clean computer, my mind racing. Where do you find the skeletons in a man's closet when he's so carefully curated his public image? I started thinking about Brandon's life before Jessica. Who was he really? Where did he come from? He'd always been vague about his past, mentioning some business ventures and partnerships that had run their course. It was all smooth corporate speak, designed to reveal nothing. Maybe the mistake wasn't in his future plans, but in his past. People like Brandon don't just appear out of nowhere. They leave a trail of burned bridges, of betrayed partners, and angry ex-employees. I just needed to find one. I remembered a name he'd mentioned once, in passing, during a family dinner months ago, long before the wedding. He'd been telling a story, trying to be charming and self-deprecating. He'd laughed about a former business partner from a tech startup that had apparently failed, a man named Kevin. Brandon had made Kevin sound like an incompetent fool who had cost them a fortune with his poor coding skills. But the way he said it, there was an edge to his laughter. A bitterness that felt personal, a deep-seated contempt that went beyond a simple business failure. It was a long shot, a desperate, flimsy thread. But it was the only one I had. I didn't know this Kevin's last name or where he lived. All I had was a first name and the name of the startup Brandon had mentioned with such disdain. It was called Next Gen Solutions. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned to the search bar. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Next Gen Solutions, Austin. My heart pounded as I scrolled through old business listings, archived articles from the Austin Business Journal, and dead-end social media pages. The first few hours were fruitless. The company had gone bankrupt 3 years ago, and most of its online presence had been scrubbed. It was a digital ghost. But I was relentless. I was a mother fighting for her child. I cross-referenced employee lists on LinkedIn. I searched public bankruptcy filings. It was a desperate, painstaking search, a shot in the dark. But I had to find a crack in the perfect facade Brandon had built around himself. I had to find the ghost from his past. I was no longer just trying to protect my money. I was fighting for my daughter's future and my own sanity. And I was about to reach out to the one person who might hate Brandon Harris even more than I did. It took me 2 full days of obsessive, caffeine-fueled digging through the digital graveyards of the internet, but I finally found him. Kevin Donnelly, the co-founder and, according to the bankruptcy filings, former CTO of Next Gen Solutions. His digital footprint was minimal, as if he'd tried to disappear after the business imploded. But I found a current profile for a small, independent IT consulting firm he now ran on the outskirts of San Antonio. There was a phone number listed. My hand trembled as I dialed, my stomach churning with a volatile mix of hope and fear. This was it. This could be everything, or it could be another dead end. What if he hung up on me? What if he was still loyal to Brandon, bound by some old non-disclosure agreement? A man answered on the second ring, his voice wary and tired. Kevin Donnelly? Mr. Donnelly, I began, my voice steadier than I felt, a calm facade over a raging sea of anxiety. I know this is going to sound very strange, and I apologize for the cold call, but I'm calling about your former business partner, Brandon Harris. There was a dead, heavy silence on the line. For a long, agonizing moment, I thought he'd hung up. Then a low, bitter laugh crackled through the phone. Brandon Harris. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Let me guess. He charmed you, he made promises, and then he screwed you over. Relief washed over me so intensely I almost sagged against the wall. It was the right man.
You have no idea, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He just married my daughter. Oh, God, Kevin sighed, and all the wariness in his voice was replaced by a weary, genuine sympathy. The poor girl. I'm sorry to hear that, truly. He paused. Look, Mrs. Price, I don't know what you want from me, but I put that part of my life behind me. Brandon, he's a black hole. He sucks everything good and hopeful into himself and leaves nothing but wreckage and debt behind. I learned my lesson the hard way. I know, I said urgently, sensing my opportunity. I'm seeing it happen right now. He's trying to take control of my finances, and he's isolating my daughter, convincing her that I'm unstable. I need proof, Mr. Donnelly. I need something to show her who he really is. He told us a story about your business. He made it sound like you were the one who ruined the company.
Kevin let out another humorless, angry laugh. Of course he did. That's his signature move, the blame shift. Let me tell you the real story, Mrs. Price. NextGen was my idea, my software, my baby. I poured 5 years of my life into it. Brandon was the money guy, the smooth talker who came in with a lot of promises and a fancy suit. He convinced me to sign over majority control of the company in exchange for a series of funding rounds that never fully materialized. He bled the company dry from the inside, funneling money into shell corporations and personal accounts, all while telling me we were on the verge of a breakthrough. Then, when the whole thing collapsed, he used his high-priced lawyers to pin the bankruptcy on my technical mismanagement. He ruined my reputation in the Austin tech scene. I lost everything. I had to start over from scratch. My heart ached for this man. Another life casually destroyed in Brandon's wake. I am so sorry, I whispered. It's in the past, he said, but I could hear the lingering pain, the raw edge of betrayal that never fully heals. But I can't stand the thought of him doing it to someone else, to your daughter. He paused, and I could hear him thinking. You said you need proof? Something to show her? Anything, I pleaded. A document, an email, anything that shows his true character. He was quiet for a long moment. You know, the night before his wedding, he threw himself a bachelor party. It was less a party and more of a business schmooze fest, really. He invited me. I have no idea why, maybe to gloat, to rub my face in how well he was doing. I didn't go, obviously. But one of my old employees, a young programmer named Alex, who Brandon had also cheated, did. He went out of morbid curiosity. My breath caught in my throat. He said Brandon got drunk, really drunk. And when Brandon gets drunk, he brags. My heart started to pound. This was it. This was the mistake David had talked about, the moment of arrogant carelessness I had been so desperately searching for. He brags? I repeated, my voice a hopeful whisper. Like a king holding court, Kevin confirmed, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. Alex said he couldn't stand it. Brandon was going on and on about his brilliant new life, his beautiful new wife. It was all so sickeningly perfect. So Alex, just to see what would happen, took out his phone and started recording. He sent the video to me the next day, just to show me what a complete and utter snake Brandon still is. It's probably nothing, just drunk talk, but... Please, I interrupted, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Can you send it to me? I will do anything. I can pay you for your time. I will make absolutely sure your name and Alex's name are never brought into this. There was another pause, but this time it was shorter. You know what? Forget it. You don't owe me anything. Consider it a wedding gift to the happy couple. He chuckled darkly, and a little bit of long overdue karma for Brandon Harris. I'll text it to you right now. Good luck, Mrs. Price. I hope you nail him to the wall. The call ended. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. It contained a single video file. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the play button. This was it, the smoking gun or another dead end. I tapped the screen. The video was shaky, clearly shot on a phone in a loud, dimly lit bar. The audio was muffled by the background thrum of music and the chatter of dozens of conversations, but Brandon's voice, amplified by alcohol and his own colossal arrogance, cut through it all. He was standing in a circle of men, all of them in expensive suits, a glass of dark whiskey in his hand.
His tie was loosened, his face flushed with booze and self-satisfaction. He looked like a Roman emperor basking in the adulation of his court. One of the men clapped him on the back. "So you finally did it, Harris. Tying the knot? What's the plan, man? Settle down, have a couple of kids, buy a house in the suburbs?" Brandon smirked, a greasy, self-satisfied expression that made my skin crawl. He took a long sip of his drink and then looked around at his audience, soaking in their attention like a sponge. Kids? Sure. A family? Absolutely. That's all part of the long-term investment. Another man laughed, a loud, braying sound that held no humor. "Investment? You make it sound like a business deal." Brandon's smirk widened. He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping slightly, but still perfectly, damnably clear on the recording. "Everything is a business deal, my friend. Everything. You guys think she's the prize?" He gestured vaguely, a dismissive flick of his wrist that was clearly meant to represent Jessica. "She's great, beautiful, a perfect wife, the perfect face for the family. But she's just the key." "The key to what?" someone asked, leaning in, intrigued. Brandon paused for dramatic effect, letting the anticipation build. Then he raised his glass in a toast. "The key to the vault," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The sweet, grieving old widow is sitting on a gold mine. Mark Price was a smart guy, smarter than anyone knew. He left her a fortune. She doesn't even know what to do with it, thinks it's for retirement." He laughed, a short, ugly barking sound that held no humor, only derision. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "So you're playing the long game, huh?" One of the men chuckled, clearly impressed by his friend's cunning. Brandon winked, a slow, deliberate gesture that was clearly meant to show off his arrogance. "Give me 6 months. 6 months of being the perfect, loving, supportive son-in-law. And all of it? The house, the stocks, the whole damn inheritance. It'll all be safely in the Harris family trust. My trust. To the vault," he slurred, raising his glass again. The men around him cheered and raised their own glasses in a sickening display of solidarity. The video ended. I just sat there, frozen, the phone still clutched in my hand. The silence in my study was deafening. There it was. Undeniable, unfiltered, the raw, naked greed of the man my daughter had married. He called me a sweet old widow. He thought I was a fragile, grieving woman who could be easily manipulated. He had underestimated me, and that was going to be the biggest and last mistake of his life. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel triumph. As I sat there in the silence of my study, the damning video replaying in my mind, I just felt a wave of pure, cold rage. It was the kind of rage that sharpens your vision and steadies your hand. He had called my daughter a key. He had called me a vault. We weren't people to him. We were objects, tools for his enrichment. The sheer breathtaking contempt he had for us was more shocking than the greed itself. For hours I wrestled with what to do next. This video was a weapon, a bomb, and I had to be incredibly careful how I detonated it. Should I call Jessica and force her to watch it with me? No.
Brandon was a master manipulator. He would find a way to twist it, to claim he was drunk, that it was a stupid joke, that his friends had been egging him on. He would turn on the tears, profess his undying love, and paint me as the villain who was trying to tear their marriage apart with a doctored video. He would manipulate the situation in person, and in her fragile, confused state, Jessica might just believe him. Should I send it to her phone? He might see it first. He was clearly monitoring her, controlling her. He could easily delete it and concoct another lie before she ever had a chance to view it. I couldn't risk it. I needed to get it to her in a way that felt private, undeniable, and gave her the space and time to process it on her own terms, without his venomous whisper in her ear, without his hands on her shoulders, without his lying eyes staring into hers. The solution came to me late that night, simple and direct. It had to be physical, something she could hold in her hand, a tangible piece of his betrayal. The next morning, I drove to a small, anonymous electronics store in a different part of town. I bought a single, simple USB flash drive. Nothing fancy, nothing traceable. I went home and, with a hand that was now perfectly steady, copied the video file onto the drive. I didn't label it. I didn't write a note. The video had to speak for itself. Any words from me, any explanation or plea, would just give Brandon ammunition to claim I was manipulating her.
I placed the small silver drive into a plain white envelope. Then I drove across town to the sleek, impersonal condo building where Jessica and Brandon lived. My heart pounded a steady, determined rhythm as I rode the elevator up to their floor. What if he was home? What if he saw me? I listened at their door for a moment. Silence. The air was still. Instead of knocking, and instead of putting it in their mailbox downstairs where he might check it first, I knelt down. I slid the thin envelope under their front door. It disappeared into the darkness of their apartment. I had no idea who would find it first, Jessica on her way out to run errands, or Brandon on his way back from the gym. It was a gamble, a terrifying all-or-nothing gamble on my daughter's intelligence, on the strength I knew was buried deep inside her, and on the small, flickering ember of doubt that I prayed still existed in her heart. I walked away without looking back. I drove home in a daze. The ball was out of my court. There was nothing more I could do but wait and pray that the truth would be enough. The next 2 days were the longest, most agonizing of my entire life. The silence was a physical weight pressing down on me, and with every passing hour my hope began to fade, replaced by the terrifying thought that I had made a fatal mistake, that I had overestimated the power of truth and underestimated the power of his manipulation. By the end of the second day, I was a wreck. I sat on my sofa, staring at my silent phone, finally accepting the crushing weight of defeat. I had played my last card, and I had lost her. I had lost her for good. And then, on the afternoon of the third day, just as a gray, dreary rain began to fall over Austin, the sound of gravel crunching in my driveway made me jump to my feet. My heart stopped. It was her car, a silver sedan, instantly recognizable. And she was alone. I rushed to the window, my hands pressed against the cool glass. I watched as she got out of the car. She moved slowly, like every limb was weighted down with lead. The rain had started to fall harder, plastering her dark hair to her pale face, but she didn't seem to notice. She didn't run for cover. She just walked deliberately, one foot in front of the other toward my front door, her eyes fixed on the ground. She looked broken. Utterly and completely broken. My heart ached for her, for the pain I knew she was feeling, the pain I had been forced to deliver to her doorstep. I didn't know if she was coming to scream at me or to cry with me, but I knew in that moment that the silence was finally over. She didn't knock. The front door just opened, and she stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor of the entryway. She clutched her phone in her hand like it was a lifeline, her knuckles white and bloodless. She didn't look at me. She walked straight past me, through the living room and into the kitchen. She went to the table, our table, the scene of so many moments in our lives, from childhood birthdays to this current nightmare, and sank into a chair.
I stood there in the doorway, my heart aching for her, not knowing what to say. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken pain and the wreckage of her shattered dreams. Finally, I moved to the stove and started making tea, the familiar, comforting ritual, a small anchor in the crushing tension. I placed a steaming mug of chamomile, her favorite since she was a teenager, in front of her. She stared at the mug for a long time, watching the steam curl up into the air before finally looking up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, empty of the bright, vibrant light I loved so much. And then she spoke, her voice a raw, shattered whisper that was barely audible over the sound of the rain against the window. I watched it. That's all she said. 3 words, but they held the weight of a whole world collapsing. I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, my own hands trembling now that the waiting was over. "The video," I stated softly, not as a question, but as a confirmation. She nodded, a single jerky movement. A tear escaped and traced a slow path down her pale cheek. "She laughed, Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking with a pain so profound it felt like a physical wound. "He called you a vault, and he called me a key." The words came out choked, filled with a sickening disbelief. The clinical, transactional nature of his betrayal was, in some ways, worse than any emotional affair. It was a complete negation of her, of them. "I found it yesterday morning," she continued,
her gaze dropping back to the table. I confronted him as soon as he got home from the gym. At first, he tried to deny it. He said, "You must have planted it." Then, when I played it for him, he said, "It was just a stupid, drunken joke, boys being boys." He said I was being hysterical, that you had finally succeeded in turning me against him. I held my breath, my heart in my throat. This was the moment of truth. "He almost had me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "He can be so convincing, Mom, so sincere. He started talking about how much he loved me, how we were a team, how it was us against the world. He made me feel crazy for even doubting him, for believing a silly video over him." She looked up at me again, and a flicker of something new appeared in her eyes. Not just pain, but a cold, hard, terrifying anger. And that's the way he looked at me when he thought I believed him. It was triumphant, a little smirk at the corner of his mouth, like he'd won. And that's when I knew. That's when I saw the man from the video standing right in front of me. She took a shaky breath. After he fell asleep last night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I opened his laptop. I knew his password. He'd told me it was my birthday. The irony. I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "And what did you find, sweetheart?" She slid her phone across the table. The screen was lit up, showing a photo she had taken of his computer screen. It was his browser history. My eyes scanned the list, and I felt sick to my stomach. The truth was worse than I could have imagined. The list on her phone screen was a digital roadmap of his cold, calculated greed. It was a chilling glimpse into the mind of a sociopath. My eyes scanned the search queries, each one a small, sharp stab to the heart. How to transfer assets from a senior parent without triggering gift tax. Legal loopholes in Texas family trusts. Early signs of grief-induced dementia and memory loss. How to bypass two-factor authentication on major bank accounts. Is a spouse automatically entitled to inheritance in Texas? Best asset hiding strategies during divorce. The searches went on and on. A timeline of his escalating intentions. It was all there. The plan, the motive, the utter chilling contempt he had for both of us. He hadn't just been opportunistic. He had been meticulously researching how to strip me of my assets and how to discredit me in the process. The search for grief-induced dementia was the most sickening of all. It proved that his gaslighting, his feigned concern for my mental state was a premeditated strategy. The silence in the kitchen was shattered, and in its place was a horrible, devastating, undeniable truth. Jessica stared at the list, her face a mask of numb disbelief. The tears that had been welling up in her eyes finally spilled over, not the quiet, sad tears from before, but wrenching, angry sobs. She let out a choked cry and buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with the force of her grief and rage. I moved around the table and wrapped my arms around her, holding her tight. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she sobbed into my shoulder, her words muffled and thick with pain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't believe you. I defended him. I let him turn me against you. I made you feel like you were crazy. How could I have been so stupid?" "Shh, no," I whispered, stroking her rain-damp hair, my own tears now falling freely. "You are not stupid. You are loving and you are trusting. Those are beautiful things. He is the one who is broken, not you. He exploited your goodness. That is his crime, not your weakness." We stayed like that for a long time, the only sounds in the room, the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall, the drumming of the rain against the window, and Jessica's quiet sobs. I let her cry it all out, the anger, the humiliation, the heartbreak of a future that had been a lie. When her tears finally subsided, she pulled back, her face blotchy and swollen, but her eyes clear for the first time in months. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "My whole life, the future I thought I had, it was all a lie." "No, it wasn't," I said firmly, taking her hands in mine and looking her straight in the eye. "The love you felt was real. Your hopes were real. He was the lie, and now we get him out of your life. For good." A new resolve seemed to settle over her, like a steel rod snapping into place down her spine. She nodded, her expression hardening. She was still my daughter, but I could see a new strength in her eyes, a strength forged in the hottest fires of betrayal. As if on cue, her phone, still on the table, began to buzz violently. It was Brandon. A string of text messages appeared on the screen, one after another, a rapid-fire assault. "Where are you? Are you at your mother's? I knew it. She's poisoning your mind against me. You can't just walk out, Jess. We're married. We made vows. Don't think you can just leave. I have lawyers. You signed things too, remember? You're complicit." Then an image came through. It was a screenshot of a joint bank account they had opened, showing a large deposit from Brandon's funds. It was followed by another text. "That money paid for our wedding. It paid for our honeymoon. If you leave me, I will sue you for fraud. I will tell everyone you married me for my money and then dumped me. I will ruin you, Jessica. I will drag your name and your mother's name through the mud until you have nothing left."
It has been a long and painful story to tell, and I just want to thank you for sticking with me. It means the world to know people are listening. If you're still here with me, please comment the number 1 below so I know you're on this journey with me. Now, you need to hear about the final showdown because we were done being afraid. Jessica stared at the phone, her face draining of all color. The threats were vicious, calculated, and designed to terrify. He wasn't begging for forgiveness. He wasn't even raging like a wounded lover. He was attacking like a cornered snake, moving immediately to blackmail and intimidation. He had been preparing for this all along, laying his own traps in case his main plan failed. He was trying to make her a prisoner of her own marriage. I gently took the phone from her shaking hand. I read the messages, and the cold rage from the other night returned, but this time it was a burning inferno. He was threatening my child. He had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. I stood up, my mind crystal clear, the fear and uncertainty completely gone, replaced by a mother's primal need to protect her young. "He's not going to ruin anyone," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I immediately dialed David Chen. I explained the situation, the video, the browser history, and now the blackmail. "He's a fool," David said after a moment of silence, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Threatening her in writing is the stupidest thing he could have done. That's coercion. We've got him, Carol. We've got him cold." David arranged the meeting for the following afternoon in a conference room at a neutral downtown law firm. It was a sterile, impersonal space with glass walls and cameras in every corner. There would be no room for lies, no room for manipulation, just the cold, hard facts. Jessica sat beside me. She was pale and her hands were trembling, but her eyes, when she looked at me, were sharp with a new, steely resolve. She wore her pain like armor. David stood quietly in the corner, a silent, imposing witness, a thick folder in his hand. Brandon arrived 10 minutes late, a deliberate, pathetic power move. He strode in wearing a black turtleneck and sunglasses, though it was overcast outside, a caricature of a villain in a cheap movie. Arrogance dripped from every step. He smirked when he saw us, as if this was all just a minor, amusing inconvenience he had to deal with. "Carol," he said smoothly, taking off his sunglasses and fixing me with his predatory gaze. "Jessica, I hear there's been some confusion, some unfortunate misunderstandings. I'm glad you're willing to talk it out like adults." He didn't even get to sit
Down. David stepped forward and slid the thick folder across the polished conference table. It landed with a heavy, final thud in front of Brandon. David said, "Consider this a courtesy copy of the file we'll be submitting to the Travis County District Attorney's Office." His voice calm and even, the voice of a man who held all the cards. Brandon's smirk wavered. He opened the folder casually at first, but as he flipped through the pages, his posture stiffened. He saw the digital forensics report from a cybersecurity expert detailing his IP address, device IDs, and the exact timestamps of his login attempts on my accounts from Jessica's tablet. He saw the screenshots of his damning browser history. He saw the signed, notarized affidavit from Kevin Donnelly detailing his fraudulent business practices with Next Gen Solutions. He saw the printouts of his threatening text messages to Jessica. "There's no crime here," he said quickly, his voice losing its smooth veneer and taking on a sharp, defensive edge. "This is circumstantial, a lot of he said, she said. You can't prove anything." "You're right," David replied calmly. "This is only enough to trigger multiple felony investigations for identity misuse, attempted wire fraud, coercion, and blackmail, which would of course freeze all of your assets and your family's assets during the lengthy and very public investigation." David paused, then placed the small silver USB drive on the table next to the folder. "And then, of course, there's this." Brandon frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What's that?" I leaned forward, making sure he could see the utter lack of fear and the abundance of contempt in my eyes. "Your voice," I said evenly, "at your bachelor party, telling your friends to give you 6 months and my entire estate would be yours, bragging about how my daughter was just a key to a vault." For the first time since I had met him, Brandon Harris was speechless. All the color drained from his face. He stared at the USB drive as if it were a venomous snake. He turned to Jessica, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes, his mouth opening as if to spin one final desperate lie. But Jessica didn't flinch. Her face was like stone. She reached into her purse, pulled out a pen, and slid it across the table toward him. It stopped right next to the annulment papers David had already prepared. The pen sat there between them, a small, simple object that held the power to end the nightmare. It was his choice, a quiet disappearance or a public self-destruction. "You're going to sign an annulment," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "On the grounds of fraud. You are going to release Jessica from every joint account, every property, every claim. You are going to walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back, quietly, today." He let out a bitter, desperate laugh, a sound that was more of a choked gasp. "You're going to ruin me?" he asked. David placed another, much thinner folder beside the first. "Or this goes public," he said calmly. "The bank logs, the affidavit from your ex-partner, the video, the text messages, the story of a man from a wealthy, respected family who preys on grieving widows and their daughters. I have a friend at the Austin American-Statesman, a Pulitzer-nominated investigative reporter, who would find this story very, very interesting. Your family's name would be dragged through the mud for years. You'd be a pariah." Brandon stared at us, his jaw tight, the wheels turning in his head as he calculated his odds. But he wasn't in control anymore. The smirk was gone, the arrogance was gone. All that was left was a cornered rat looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, with a snarl of pure, impotent fury, he snatched the pen, scribbled his signature on every page with a violent, angry flourish, and shoved the folder back across the table. He stood, shoved his sunglasses back on his face like a shield, and walked out of the conference room without another word. The door clicked shut, and an absolute, profound silence filled the room. It was over. And then the sound of Jessica's first sob broke the silence, a sound of grief, but also of immense, shuddering relief, and the real healing could finally begin. That night, Jessica came home with me. The drive was silent, but it was a comfortable silence now, a shared space of recovery. When we stepped inside my house, she dropped her purse on the floor and sat heavily at the kitchen table, in the exact same spot where this whole nightmare had begun. I brewed our tea. She looked at me, her eyes clear. "Is it true, Mom, about the money?" I nodded. It was time for no more secrets. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true.
Your father left me $7 million. She breathed the number, her eyes wide. I explained why I'd kept it secret, my promise to her father to protect her from the very poison that had just entered and exited her life. She understood. In the weeks that followed, we healed. It wasn't a straight line. There were days of anger, of tears, of crushing self-doubt for Jessica. But we did it together. She reconnected with Sarah. She started therapy. She started to laugh again. About a month later, she came to me with a folder of her own, filled with research. "Mom," she said, her eyes bright with a new purpose, "what if we did something? Financial elder abuse, what Brandon tried to do to you, it happens all the time. What if we used a small part of Dad's inheritance, the real inheritance, to help?" Her idea was simple but brilliant. We would create a small foundation. We would call it the Price of Trust. It would provide grants to legal aid organizations that represent seniors who are victims of financial fraud. It would fund workshops to teach people how to spot the red flags. Tears welled in my eyes. This was the woman I had raised, strong, compassionate, and determined to turn her own pain into someone else's protection. My husband would have been so proud. Brandon's greed would now, ironically, fund the very thing he despised, justice for the vulnerable. True wealth isn't what's in your bank account. It's the family you can trust and the strength you build together. That monster tried to take everything from us, but in the end, he only made us stronger. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but it's important. Have any of you ever had to protect a loved one from a wolf in sheep's clothing? Or have you experienced a financial betrayal in your own family? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the warning sign that someone else needs to see. Please like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more true stories. Be safe and always, always trust your gut.